Henry, good to see you. Thanks for joining today. For those few people who are not familiar with ZoomInfo, give us a quick overview on what the firm does.
So we're a go-to-market intelligence tools. We work with sales and marketing teams, giving them access to the companies and the decision makers and intelligence around those companies that drive their go-to-market efforts.
So Henry, you're one of the rare bird companies, which is a high growth company at scale. You filed your S1 not too long ago. You have a diverse workforce. One of the things I was really curious about in speaking to leaders was how the people within their workforce are dealing with this the pandemic news, and maybe speak a little bit to the younger workforce, the people who haven't gone through a blip before. What are you doing with those people specifically to enroll them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, I think those people, the youngest people on our team are probably the least affected from the shift to work from home and the shift to sort of a completely digital workforce. I mean, for one, they don't have kids at home, and so they're not dealing with the double impact of not just working from home in probably a really uncomfortable, awkward space, but they don't have their kids running around. They don't have to deal with sort of distance education. So they've been the most resilient in this time. I think the piece for us from a work perspective that I think that they're struggling with the most is how to be disciplined and professional while being at home, which is a muscle that has to be built. And so we've been working pretty hard with them to make sure that if, to the extent they have a space, that they carve it out, that they build time throughout their day to take breaks or walks and take their minds off of the day, and that they're dressed professionally for the work day, because we think that goes a long way. But mostly they've been the most resilient in this time.
Henry, what in terms of, you spoke to some of the things that you're teaching and coaching them to do differently. What's changed for you? Like how has your cadence changed? How are you communicating to the team?
Yeah, I mean, so first, like I'm in the more, I mean, not in the sense that I've been more affected by the work from home shift, because we've built a culture really around being in the office, and the office was a lot of the part of the energy and the excitement of the company. And so shifting to a place where we're all sort of isolated has been, hard on me, and I think probably hard on a handful of our employees as well. But for me, figuring out how I still get those ad hoc interactions with my team has been really important. And so our teams are doing stand-ups at different times of the day, all day, every day. I get a list of those that come up on my calendar, and I've been picking ones to just drop in on, where I get a feel for like what's happening in BI and what's happening in QA or engineering or sales. And so that's been a good way to stay connected. But I draw a lot of my energy from being around people and being in that office culture. And so adjusting to that has been, not the easiest thing I've ever done.
So in addition to video meetings like we're doing right now, Henry, what are other techniques you're using? Are you sending emails out every day, every week? What's sort of the cadence and communication from the top to the team?
I'm sending out emails about twice a week to the entire staff. Our CHRO on the other 3 days is sending out emails directly to everybody on the team. So they're getting daily emails from us. I've been dropping in on gong calls. So we record our sales and account management calls. And so where I have 15 minutes, where usually I'd walk down the hall and catch a minute with somebody, I'm going to Gong and listening to a call and adding feedback there and using it as an opportunity to coach, but also to hear sort of what the front lines are hearing and dealing with. And that's been a big change. And I think it's been well received too around the company. So emails twice a week to the company as a whole, but every day from somebody on my leadership team. And then dropping in on gong calls and dropping in on these daily huddles that the teams are having.
So Henry, with the years that you've worked in growing and building your business to a formidable size, you've seen headwinds, you've seen tailwinds. When somebody asks you, "Hey Henry, are we facing a problem, like an existential problem, a temporary problem, or at the other end of the spectrum, an inconvenience?" how do you sort of judge that, and how do you engage with your team around how dire or not dire or temporary the situation is?
Yeah, so first, like I think everybody in March kind of was a little bit shell shocked in that they didn't really know what data to look at to get a feel for what the future was going to hold
Hmm.
for us or for everybody. I think one of the things that we saw in March is, and that we've celebrated around the company, because I think it's important in setting the framework for how people think about this, is we were still selling plenty of new business. We were still renewing and upselling our clients, and making sure that everybody is hearing a very positive message about new companies coming on board, companies doubling down on their investment in ZoomInfo is really important for everybody to hear, because at some point every day, I think there's somebody on our workforce who's thinking like, I'm not going to find the next deal. All of my customers are not going to renew. This whole thing's going to bring down the economy, and then it's going to get even worse. And so they can a go down a rabbit hole to a bad place. And so publishing really good news that's happening, and every day there's a bunch of good happening across our teams. And so trying to capture that and then publish it to everybody at the company, I think is just like a really helpful thing to hear. There isn't a lot of good news that you're hearing today, whether it's on the news or from your coworkers or your family. But we have like nuggets of really great things happening in our company every day. And so being able to share that across the team, I think is really valuable.
Henry, tell us about one that has to do with ZoomInfo having impact, not internal impact, like we got to be able to renew the customer, retain the customer, but about the platform being used to help another organization. Are there any like that?
Yeah. So there's a great one. We work with a company called Tentcraft. Tentcraft is a Midwest based event tent seller. And so go to a Taylor Swift concert, you see the big VIP tent or the green room tents in the back. That's what Tentcraft does. And then, instantly every event on planet Earth ended and wasn't happening. And so their whole business came to a halt. And the CEO there, it's a guy named Matt Bullock, transitioned the business, almost overnight. He said, look, we make tents. Hospitals need tents for coronavirus testing. More and more want drive-through tents. And so let's reimagine our business around hospitals and healthcare facilities. And so they have never sold to hospitals. They don't really understand the decision-making process there. They don't know sort of how many hospitals there are in the United States or who the right decision makers are to reach out. And they had bought a package from ZoomInfo that was not designed to sell to hospitals. It was designed to sell to, event organizers. And so what we were able to do is spin them up on a data set that included hospitals and healthcare facilities, and then give them the credits and flexibility to be able to gather that information and then use it in their outbound go-to-market programs. And there's an article actually on Inc. magazine. They sold a hospital in Erie, Pennsylvania, then a hospital in Texas, then a hospital in New Jersey.
Awesome.
And so they were able to pivot using the power of our platform to do that. So it's one I think we're all really proud about.
Hmm. So, Henry, how long have you been leading the company?
13 years.
Okay, so we're about same number of years in the saddle, in the teens. So when you think about what it takes to be resilient, and you think about what we're going through right now, how much of past experience influences how you operate today, or is this pretty different?
I think this is pretty different. I mean, look, I've been doing this for 13 years, which means I did this through the recession, but it was a tiny, tiny business in the recession. And so it's hard to say like, yeah, well, we doubled sales between '08 and '09. And so you can apply that, we went from $800,000 to $2 million. It's just a different scale. So you can't really apply those learnings.
Mhm.
I think the thing that I think about here is, one of the things that this pandemic does is it shines a light on everywhere in your business that you're not perfectly executing. And you kind of know those things anyways. Like we're not great in this part of the business or that part of the business. And the pandemic happens and the business slows down and you're like, okay, I see. This part of the business is actually more painful now, not being great at it, than it was when everything's growing, and it sort of hides the areas you're not perfectly executing on.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm taking this opportunity to go, look, I don't want to have that feeling anymore anyways. I don't want to think about the business and go like, yeah, things are really great, but they're just not really great over here or over there. And so let's take this opportunity. And most often those things have a real impact on your customers. And so we're taking the time to say, let's retool a little bit and go like, let's go fix those things that we've been ignoring and we're not perfectly executing against. And so that I'm viewing that as a real opportunity right now.
So Henry, when pressure builds, right, compression occurs. For some people, they start to fracture, crack a little bit. Other people sort of rise up and they're like, this is a galvanizing moment. Talk about, is there an example within the business where someone just had this heroic event or this heroic moment where, holy smokes, did they ever respond to this pressure, where it was a really positive outcome? Is there anything like that you've observed?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot of, first of all, I think the biggest thing that I could think about is we have account management and account executive and directors and management staff that is all of a sudden at home with their kids at home and with their spouses at home. And so I think there are hundreds of people who had to adjust every day to a new normal that is pretty heroic. And they're doing it by, coming in early before their kids wake up, then helping their kids, then coming in later at night when their kids go to bed. They're switching responsibilities between themselves and their spouse. They're finding ways to do something that would have felt impossible a month ago. And I think there's example after example after example of our team doing that. I mean, one of the interesting things that I've learned is I've been historically really anti work from home. I think it's important to be under one roof with your team, and the collaboration that happens in that environment is really valuable. I also think, and I think a lot of people learned, that they are in fact less productive at home. Many people are less productive at home than they would be otherwise. Now, there's a whole bunch of additional circumstances that happened with this thing. But one thing I've learned is there are a lot of people who are just more productive at home. And so I've had, example after example of people on our sales team or our account management team, and especially our engineering team, who've said like, I am much more productive at home than I was. You can see it in my numbers. You can see it in my metrics. I've been asking to work from home for the last year, and I'm so much more open to that when we come out of this pandemic than I was before. Because I think that one of the things that this will show people is there are a set of people who are really bad at work from home. They're just like, it's not for them. They also want to be under one roof with their friends, and they want the chit chat and the coffee and the collaboration. And there's another set of people who are like, I don't really need all of that, and I'm way more productive at home. And so I'll be a lot more liberal coming out of this with how we dole out work from home to our staff.
Yeah, it's those unintended positive consequences. I think about some of the chatter we heard in the first couple of weeks around fewer interruptions while someone's trying to engage on getting a project done. It's amazingly, people aren't late to meetings as much. I mean, the hit rate is way higher. It's like, who would have thought? I agree with you, Henry. I feel the same way in terms of just being more open. And I think that's one of those things coming out of this. It could affect things like where you open offices, the degree to which you do hoteling, all of those downstream considerations, which I agree. I used to raise my eyebrow to those as well. Henry, when you look at where we are in the process right now, we don't have antibody testing yet. We are still trying to get people to just administer tests at scale. Feels like we're still in the middle of it. It's very easy to feel pessimistic right now.
Yep.
Putting ZoomInfo aside for a second, what makes you optimistic? Why are you optimistic? Are you optimistic?
Yep. First of all, like, I think if you put ZoomInfo aside, there's no benefit in me being anything but optimistic. Like, I don't get any benefit out of thinking about like what, what's gonna happen if we don't get these things out, and do we have to wait till a vaccine comes, and what happens to the stores and the economy? There's just right now. I think what everybody knows is that they don't know. And so I'm happy not knowing and thinking optimistically than not knowing and thinking pessimistically. And my wife just the other day was doing the spiral thing where it was like, but then this happens, and aren't you worried about what happens after the banks run out of money, and then what happens, and can the federal government just keep printing money? And I was like, look, I don't know, and I get no benefit out of just thinking the worst case scenario. And so I'm just going to think about the best case scenario. And as more and more information comes out, I can readjust my thinking around that optimistic thought. But right now, I'm just trying to be optimistic about it.
Yeah, I love it, Henry. Well, I think one of the things that I think we'll conclude on is this, and my takeaway from this conversation will be that the return on pessimism is extraordinarily low.
Extraordinarily
and we
low.
get to adjust our thinking along the way. Henry, appreciate the 15, 20 minutes you gave. Good luck. Keep leading well.
Thanks, Mark.